Hey guys, I hope everybody's doing well. So today I'm going to read you chapter 1 from my romantic suspense novel, The River Beautiful. This contemporary story means a lot to me because I was able to draw on my own experiences with grief and loss. But what was really cool was I was able to incorporate some aspects of early American history as well as British history, which I'm a huge fan of, so that was great. The novel does release on May 26, 2020 with Celebrate Lit, and it is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. The River Beautiful by Andrea Carmen. Chapter 1. Lina was a talented liar. The trait had served her well over the past year, protected her. Now the consequences were close at hand, and she wasn't sure she remembered how to tell the truth. She leaned against the wall under the apartment building's entrance awning, the cool shade providing relief from the late afternoon sun, but not her growing worry. A shudder of anxiety prompted her to look down the narrow street. Not a car in sight. The bricks at her back snagged her long chestnut hair, and she winced at the momentary irritation. She took a quick glance at her phone and huffed. Surely the taxi driver would arrive soon. She waved air toward her sweat-beaded face, relishing the cool relief. Having lived in southern Georgia for the past year, Lina had adapted to the weather. She could easily bear the heat. In fact, after what she'd been through, she could bear anything, or at the very least make it appear that way to others. The thought of escaping inside to the central air conditioning crossed her mind, but that wouldn't help. The coolness of the apartment lobby would only diminish the visage of heat-induced anxiety as the real deal set in. Great. The last thing I need right now is to have a panic attack. At that thought, her thoughts disconnected. The bustling traffic of the afternoon faded until all she could hear was the quickening thud of her heart. Her knees gave a quick wobble and she steadied herself against the brick wall. It's okay. Everything's fine. Another lie. Everything wasn't fine. She pulled at her t-shirt with a clammy hand and focused on breathing. A gulp of air filled her lungs just as the yellow taxicab swung around the corner, bringing distraction from the consuming attack. She exhaled, but a deeper apprehension remained. The cool temperature inside the cab would be a welcome modification, but every minute that passed was just another minute closer to facing her failure. The thought of escape crossed her mind. Just turn around and forget the whole thing. She'd fallen back on the pattern countless times. All she had to do was send the cab away and march back up the stairs to her apartment. Another lie might cover her, at least for a while. The apprehension would pass, and she could once again escape her return to the small town of Kennerdell. Her gaze traveled up to her safe haven on the third floor, a place where the past had been nothing but a long-forgotten memory. In the little apartment on Langsky Street in Thomasville, Georgia, Lina had been able to be herself. She didn't have a label there. Another short breath accompanied the thought of soon having to be more. She didn't know if she had it in her to be everyone else's Lina again. Maybe a phone call to her mother would suffice. No, not an option. She scolded herself as her stomach turned at the thought of weakness. This was her reality. She owned it, and it was time to face the music. Hurting the people she loved had become a habit Lina fully intended to break. As she opened the cab's rear door, it let out a squeal as bits of rust dusted the ground. An icy rush of air escaped past her face and into the dense heat. She placed the single suitcase containing the necessities for her short visit into the cab. "Albany, please," she instructed the driver as she settled into her seat. The Southwest Georgia Airport. The driver, a middle-aged man with a soft, receding gray hairline, veered onto Langsky Street and made his way toward the interstate. "Airport, huh?" He glanced at her suitcase in the rearview mirror. "So where you headed?" He was obviously not a Georgia native. After having lived in Thomasville, Lina could easily recognize the Georgian accent. He had a bit of a southern drawl, but she guessed it more likely from further north, maybe the North Carolina area. "Just heading home for a visit," she replied curtly. Discussing her many failures with a stranger would be useless. "You're a student?" the driver asked. A jolt of annoyance riveted her. "Yep," she lied. There was no need to tell the stranger she dropped out halfway through the first semester, or that college no longer mattered to her. After years of failing to rise to the expectations of those around her, she was happy to let the dream go. "Always nice to go home and see family," he stated. "I guess," Lina replied. His statement struck a sore chord of guilt. He was right. A person should be happy to go home and see their family, at least the type of family Lina had been fortunate enough to have. But Lina hadn't set foot in Kennerdell since the day she moved to Thomasville. She'd invented any excuse she could to convince her mother of her inability to visit, and over time, the embellishments she came up with to keep the charade going became increasingly clever. When Lina had told her mother about an alumni scholarship she'd received, her mother had been very pleased she no longer needed to send tuition payments. Pleased and proud. Lina muttered an ironic laugh, and the driver must have heard her as she caught a strange glance in the rearview mirror. Embarrassed, she looked away to the passing cars in the next lane. It was easy to imagine her mother telling everyone in town about the scholarship. Mary Woodruff would have bagged anyone who would listen. It was too bad she wouldn't be proud of her much longer. Not once she knew the truth. Deceiving her family was painful, and the knowledge filled her with shame. It was a pure streak of luck that Lina had been accepted to Thomas University in the first place. Well, luck in the fact that her mother was old friends with the dean of admissions. Under any other circumstances, Lina wouldn't have been able to get in. Her high school grades were poor, even though she'd managed to redeem herself somewhat during her senior year. Aside from her mother's connection to the dean, Lina's ACT scores had been the only other promising quality she'd had to offer. Now going home meant the truth would come out. She couldn't lie to her family forever. She would have to tell her mother that, despite her best efforts to ensure Lina had a solid future, she had failed. Again. And the thought saddened her. Her mother didn't deserve that. Not after the loss their family had suffered. The hour of travel between Thomasville and the airport passed quickly, and the next thing Lina knew, the cab pulled up to the entrance. "Sorry you're so quiet, miss," the driver said. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lina replied. "I just have a lot on my mind." His brow furrowed as he frowned. After he quietly assisted in retrieving Lina's suitcase, she paid him, and he returned to the driver's seat. Just before he pulled away, he rolled down the passenger window. "Ma'am," he yelled after Lina. Lina turned and gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Yes?" Had she forgotten to tip him or say thank you? "Whatever's troubling you, miss, just remember, God's always there to help." He smiled and abruptly drove away. Want to bet? What kind of help had she ever received from God? As if anyone could handle the things she'd gone through and still be that positive. It must be nice to be so optimistic, irritatingly optimistic. She remembered a time when she felt that way about life, a time when she'd been carefree and happy, truly happy. And that was before it happened, the event that changed her, damaged her, and made her fatherless. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Once she made her way through airport security, she was finally ready to board the plane. From this point, there would be no turning back. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but it didn't go away. She rifled through her bag, anxiously searching for the candy bar she'd brought. Some chocolate might temporarily ease her apprehension. Her fingers found the smooth surface of the score bar wrapper, and she let out a sigh of satisfaction as she unwrapped the small snack. If only she'd remembered to bring the box of treats her mother had sent her as well. Lina's mother sent care packages to her every month, and they always contained her favorite snacks and magazine subscriptions. Of course, Lina's magazines were not typical reading material for a young woman her age. There was never an issue of glamour or allure present in those packages. Lina only subscribed to 2 magazines, History and Archaeology by the Smithsonian and the Native Peoples magazine, and she looked forward to receiving them every month. Lina's roommate always seemed to have a good time joking with her about it. Lina was the only girl she knew who not only preferred paper magazines over online articles, but also found those topics entertaining. She smiled as she remembered trying to explain to the girl the satisfaction of perusing the smooth pages. But it had been a fruitless effort. She hadn't understood Lina's fascination with the content or its method of delivery. It was times like that when Lina really missed the only other person in the world who could understand the appeal of those magazines. Will. Her mind jolted at the thought of him. She could only hope he would be happy to see her after so long. Despite her current state of mind, Lina remembered the beginning of her childhood as happy. She thought it so bizarre that years of joyful experiences could be annihilated in a matter of minutes. When she was a child, she viewed life as a balancing act. Good outweighed bad, right triumphed wrong. Her mother used to laugh about the lists she made whenever she was punished for misbehaving. Lina would count all the things she'd done wrong and come up with a greater number of tasks and good deeds to balance things out. Her mother had thought it was simply Lina's way of getting out of trouble, but Lina really believed life was like that. It wasn't long before she learned that a single event held the power to shatter a person beyond the point of redemption. As she waited in line to take her seat, the short-term effects of the candy bar were long forgotten and reality struck. She would soon be home. Anxiety over her deception seemed small in comparison to the reminders that awaited her. She stowed her travel bag away and attempted to get comfortable, thankful she'd managed to acquire a window seat on the flight. Sitting in the aisle always made her uneasy. Too much traffic and too many people to acknowledge. In her cozy spot against the window, she could let her imagination drift away into the soft white clouds that hovered peacefully outside. She put her earbuds in and nodded against the frame of the oval window, gazing out at the great expanse of sky as the large aircraft sped down the runway. After a while, she closed her eyes and attempted to tune out the rest of the world, drifting to sleep to the sound of one of her favorite songs. Her dreams could be her escape for a bit. She would have enough reality to deal with when she arrived home. The plane landing was a bit rough, though perhaps it only felt that way because Lina was wound so tight she could sense the vibration from every speck of gravel on the runway. She looked out the window at the sky, now gray and hazy. Northwest Pennsylvania tended to have quite a few foggy mornings during early autumn. It had something to do with the valley lowland effect from the surrounding Allegheny Mountains. Her father had told her about it once. She couldn't remember the details, though, and supposed it really didn't matter. The dense gloom pressed upon her a familiar weight of regret. Rubbing the area under her collarbone, she inhaled deeply, calming her nerves. It seemed another attack was not imminent. Lina had become accustomed to the sensation of empty panic. It was as though a deep hole existed in the center of her chest. She could always feel it there, ripping away at her, growing. Strangely, she didn't mind the ever-present vacancy too much. The sensation of that hollow cavity made her feel prepared. The bottom of her life had dropped out once before, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it happened again. Next time it wouldn't be such a surprise. Miss? Lina looked up at the tall, thin woman hovering over her. Apparently, the flight attendant had been trying to get her attention for some time now. Oh, yes. What? Lina looked around and noticed the plane was almost empty. I'm sorry, I guess I was daydreaming. That's quite all right, miss. The flight attendant gave her a tight-lipped smile. It's time to exit. Lina blushed. Thanks. She quickly gathered her things and navigated her way down the narrow aisle. Upon entering the airport lounge, she found her younger sister, Gabby, waiting with an elated grin. Lina gasped. It took everything in her not to burst with happiness. It had only been a year, but her sister had grown so beautiful and so much more grown up. Gabby was still shorter than Lina, and her bright blonde hair, currently adorned with blue and white ribbons, hadn't darkened even a shade since the last time they'd seen one another. Her starburst eyes still held a familiar twinkle of curiosity, and if the cheerleading gear she was decked in was any indication, she'd come straight from a game. Lina quickly walked over to her younger sister and gave her a generous hug. Oh, Lina, Gabby squealed as she draped her arms around Lina's neck. I've missed you so much. Wait until I tell you everything that's been going on around here. Of course, high school is still just the worst experience of my life, but I'm halfway through, so I suppose I'll survive. The family drama has hit an all-time high, though. Mom is driving me crazy, and I'm so happy you're here to help me deal. Lina listened in a bit of a daze as Gabby continued to chatter. It seemed Gabby's personality hadn't changed much. They were so different from each other. Gabby possessed such a bright and cheerful disposition, whereas Lina had always been quiet and reserved. They didn't even look very much alike. While Gabby was the textbook example of a blonde-haired, bubbly girl, Lina had long brown hair and a darker complexion. The only trait they had in common was their blue eyes. At least Gabby's energy and enthusiasm hadn't suffered the same way Lina's had following their shared tragedy. Gabby. Her sister continued talking, so Lina tried once more to gain her attention. Gabby. Gabby stopped and smiled. Oh, sorry. What, Lina? I'm exhausted. Can we talk in the car? I'd love to get out of this airport. "Oh, sure, let's go." Gabby turned and made a beeline to the exit. On the way home, Gabby babbled endlessly about the drama that regularly affected teenage life. And as much as she had missed her sister and loved her dearly, Lina couldn't seem to stay focused on what she was saying. The chasm in her chest grew larger by the second. They had already been in the car for about 20 minutes, which meant she had only a little time before they arrived at the house. Maybe she should just come clean to Gabby right now. Maybe that would make it easier when she told their mother. Or maybe not. After all, the way Gabby went on, who knew how long she could keep her mouth shut? She decided to wait. They continued driving down Route 308 until the Kennerdell Bridge came into view. Lena's eyes were quickly drawn to the rolling hills of fir trees, white oaks, and black willows she knew so well. The thick forest lined almost every inch of the hillside. Depths and shadows cast by the gray light evoked childhood memories of mystery and adventure. The massive height of the trees lining the highway made her feel small, a tiny part of a much larger world. She had so many fond recollections of hiking the paths in that forest. When she was a child, every outing had felt like some sort of quest. Every hike along the Allegheny Trail an expedition. Equipped with the small leather satchel her father had given her, she spent long summer days searching for lost artifacts she believed to be buried somewhere in the wilderness of the Allegheny forest. She smiled as she remembered imagining herself a young Indiana Jones, determined to find something that would change history. Lina's father spent as much time as possible in the forest, and they could easily lose entire afternoons walking the footpaths that ran alongside the river. Occasionally, they would venture off the trail into the dense woods, and Lina especially enjoyed those times with him. The area had suited him perfectly. Carl Woodruff was a professor of history and anthropology at Allegheny College, specializing in courses on Native North American culture and European history. He chose to raise his family in the Kennerdell area, a place where he felt in his element. He could maintain a family and a career, still quench his thirst for discovery, culture, and some adventure, no matter how imaginary it might have been. And he was drawn to the Lenni Lenape people, or as the Europeans had named them, the Delaware Indians. The Lenape tribe was indigenous to the Pennsylvania area. During the time of English colonization, many tribes had no choice but to move out west or north. The area where Lina grew up served as a resting point for them in their travels. Being densely wooded along the river and still undeveloped by English settlers at the time, it provided the perfect place for traveling Lenape to camp and hunt. During the forced migration of the 1700s, some members of the tribe moved to Canada, New York, and Ohio, but a few families stayed behind in the Allegheny area. The community in Kennerdell was closely knit and provided a pleasant, safe place to grow up. Lina had enjoyed every moment of her childhood, but as she now gazed up at the hills thick with happy memories, she felt the tightness return to her chest. A darkness lingered in that forest now, a pain she could never forget no matter how desperately she tried, and she turned her attention away from the view. And that's the end of chapter 1. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if it wasn't perfect and professional, I apologize because I'm kind of new at this. I hope you guys have a great week. Thanks.